folks. We are starting a conversation on the couch, and this is a new series we are starting, and we are really glad to have somebody like Professor Srikanth Kondapalli. I don't need to really introduce him because he's a big name in the field of international relations and when it comes to China. And the expert on strategic affairs, geopolitics, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli is here with us today in Guwahati, and we thought we must not miss this opportunity to talk to him. So me and Binayak Sundas, who's a friend of mine, a professor and an expert as well when it comes to the Himalayas and strategic affairs, we will be talking to Professor Kondapalli. Welcome, sir. It's so nice to see you again.
Thank you very much.
And we would just like to talk to you about generally about, we've seen how the global politics is playing out close to our doorsteps. We've seen the change in Bangladesh, we're seeing the changes in Myanmar, or rather the continuing changes in Myanmar, and of course China, on how China is really unfolding its tricks and its different policies, and how are we responding. But we would like to, for the sake of our audience here in the Northeast and in the region, like to talk about the chicken neck or the Siliguri Corridor, which seems to have become, which was important, but now there is more awareness and people are talking about it. So please, if you could, at the beginning, Binayak, if you could ask sir to just tell us about the Siliguri Corridor.
I was wanting to ask you about this, sir. Recently, there have been, a lot of concerns about the region, right? And I think the concern stems from two sort of possible arguments. One is, of course, the Chinese threat and possible sort of analogy that people talk about dagger that is right on the neck, the Chumbi Valley is what I'm referring to. And the other, of course, is about migration and then sort of changing the demographics of the region. Which of these two are the real threats to the chicken's neck?
That's a good question. Thank you for having me in the show. I think the major danger is in terms of China factor. I do not think the demographics would affect really. The demographic changes are going to be long term, and these are kind of dispersed in nature. The Chinese, on the other hand, are bringing in modern technology. They're bringing in modern kind of warfare. They're learning from what has happened between Azerbaijan and Armenia in terms of drone warfare. They're bringing in what has happened in Russia-Ukraine conflict, the kinetic warfare. The third is the current events in Gaza, where we have seen the pagers and also the handsets, walkie-talkies, and all. So it's a full-dimensional kind of warfare. The Chinese have two Chinese colonels have written a book called the Unrestricted Warfare. They have suggested that the kind of warfare we're going to see in the 21st century is going to be full spectrum and all round. There are no certain things like peace or warfare intermingling, but it is a kind of continuous cycle where you don't see specific like the Napoleonic warfares, but it is war as a continuum around the clock. As you know, the current wealth is based on stock exchanges in many countries, and so if there is a crash, and during global financial crisis, during Asian financial crisis, and subsequently with the overall financial crisis, we saw hundreds of millions of investors affecting, and countless of them committed suicide. So it brings in a kind of social disruption, which is not part of the traditional warfare that we saw since Napoleonic times. So the suggestion there is that conflict can be seen at any time, 24/7, 365 days. China brings in the technology, and that's where we need to worry about.
So just wanted to ask you, the social disruptions that you talk about, don't you think it's been happening? I mean, in different forms. We talk about the social disruptions now because the economic warfare, which if you are referring to, which China is sort of waging, apart from the traditional forms of warfare, has actually caused the social disruption to enhance from where it was. Would that be a right way of really looking at it?
Exactly. I think we have had disruptions before, unrelated to warfare, but there is a deliberate attempt by the state and a state which has global ambitions to also dominate regionally, and that is where some of these will become problematic. Not just the stock exchanges, but for example, the Siliguri Corridor. The kind of mobilization that is being done will have consequences for sea lanes of communications. We can even equate the Siliguri corridor to a sea lane of communication. So the disruption could also be very significant.
So, and then when you just talk about Vinayak, just this the disruption, Siliguri corridor, from your experiences, sir, and the kind of studies that you have done, do you think the threat perception is very close to, is it immediate, or are we looking at a timeline that we don't know when this is going to happen, or like is it very uncertain?
In the Indian Defence Ministry parlance, we have long-term threat, medium-level threat, small short-term threat. A short-term threat would be, for instance, the enemy outside our gate, and we need to then prepare for the kind of threat that we are visualizing.
Are we prepared?
I think we are prepared, and China also knows this. When Galwan incident happened, we mobilized 120,000 troops in eastern Ladakh, and China mobilized 70,000 troops. If China wants to have a decisive outcome in Galwan or post Galwan, then they have to mobilize 8:1. That is, for every one Indian soldier, they have to mobilize 8 soldiers. But the equation is 70,000 Chinese troops, we are 120,000 troops. There is no way you can match this. For a successful outcome, you have to have 8:1. Otherwise, it's a stalemate. And we saw last 4.5 years, the Galwan is a stalemate. We have not had any forward momentum. China keeps threatening in terms of technology, drones, non-kinetic warfare, that is 3 warfares, psychological, media, legal. Nevertheless, we have not yet been succumbed to the pressures.
So from the Texas, sir, if I may just cut you, I mean, we'll come back to this, but I was wondering, sir, from a very, scenario point of view, what is the main threat that we would face from the Chinese in terms of the equipment that they have? Is it a barrage of missile fire to the Siliguri region, or will it take place in a much more subtle way, as you were mentioning about the use of pagers and disrupting our lines of communication and so on and so forth?
So this could be a kind of surprise element. All future warfares are surprise. October 7th, the Israeli intelligence did not conceive that the mates will come in large number. For instance, as you mentioned, a barrage of missile strikes. Likewise, they have tanks, but tanks cannot move forward with the kind of attacks that happened in. So we have to think out of the box, possibly have not just the defensive, which we are generally focused on. Our traditional focus has been more defensive. So we have to go actually into an offensive mode, probably striking deeper inside China rather than being defensive in nature. And we do have the capability, and we could possibly have other standoff weapon systems like electromagnetic pulse weapon systems and so on, which would blockade the Chinese ability to strike us. Instead of receiving the blow, we can actually think of having a blow on the Chinese.
So, but there's also the question of the other neighbors. You have Bhutan and you have Nepal. How would you sort of now, at this point of time, when you talk about the offensive, India literally going or thinking offensive, Bhutan is also getting very close to China. And there are lots of things that are unsaid. We don't know. Bhutan does not want to talk about a lot of different things that it does with China. there's some kind of secrecy insofar as Bhutan is concerned. What we know is maybe not enough. Nepal, on the other side, is getting gradually closer to China. There are lots of different investments that the Chinese are making in Nepal, which is good for the Nepali society because they need development. But then beyond the development also there is the closeness that Beijing is really working out with Nepal. How does all that really work into the plans that you're talking about insofar as India is concerned?
I don't think Bhutan and Nepal will allow the Chinese to militarily, if it is finance on projects, on infrastructure, on developmental works, it is understandable. But when it comes to the military forces, given the long historical cultural contacts that India has with Bhutan and Nepal, I do not think they will allow the Chinese military to play in these countries. But I have one concern that is related to Bangladesh and Myanmar, where we have in the fishtails and Parchuram Kund areas where we want to reach out in terms of the kinetic warfare. But this may not be said the same for Bangladesh and Myanmar, and so that is basically our concern on the use of airspace. Otherwise, it will restrict our operations in terms of a full-blown war.
So in a way, we could say that while we have two neighbors that can actually somewhere ensure that the Siliguri Corridor is safe, because we are building this defense, that they will not allow the Chinese really to, get into a situation where they are bombarding and, attacking our strategic positions. We have Bangladesh and Myanmar that are the weak spots. So really, in a way, then the Siliguri Corridor is still not safe. To make this corridor safe for us, what are the things do you think that New Delhi, the North and the South bloc sitting together should think of, and that can actually work on the ground?
What India needs to focus is on economic development, creating assets, developing SMEs, small and medium enterprises, generating jobs, generating employment, generating economic prosperity throughout this region. I think we need to be more constructive rather than focusing only on the defense. The kind of prosperity that we can generate through this by industrialization, by various other economic development projects, we need to focus on this, and North Bengal regions. Primarily, we need to focus on economic development. That generates a lot of income for the defense forces. First, we would have stabilized the economy, and then that would have led to more channelizing of resources into defense, not the other way around. We need to first make the people prosperous, and then the defense related. It automatically follows that defense gets strengthened, because once you create these assets, there will be security for them in the entire region. So number one strategy that India needs to follow, and the regional states need to follow, Assam, North Bengal, West Bengal, need to follow, is primarily on infrastructure development, industrialization, service sector. I would suggest even semiconductor industry. With the kind of assets that you develop in this, automatically security will come in order to protect these assets. So we need to focus on this. We need to focus on HRD, human resource development, education, healthcare, and longevity, and so on and so forth. So that's very hospitals, and so that is a second area. Of course, finally, we need to strengthen defenses, and I think we have substantial. But in defense, we need to have standoff weapon systems. We need to have more offensive planning, because the Chinese last week have experimented with a 8,000 drone synchronization, and so the capability is like that. We could expect that kind of a barrage. Drones are very inexpensive, and Azerbaijan had shown in Armenia, mobilization of tanks, armored personnel carriers, even rocket launchers can be just knocked off by a few very inexpensive drones.
Ukraine is doing it.
Ukraine has done.
So when we are talking about these new forms of warfare and need of, what we need to do in the Siliguri Corridor, etc. There's also one problem that I think is that most of the thinking is unfortunately done in Delhi. Most of the conferences happen in these centers. Do you think it's time for academia and the military to develop some kind of nexus, say within the Siliguri Corridor, talking about local regions and how we can secure them?
Siliguri should take the lead rather than other places and organize. I would suggest the universities, think tanks, schools, colleges, you have the local knowledge and you know how to protect these, develop these, and so they should take the lead, go forward, do surveys, what are the vulnerabilities first and how do we counter these vulnerabilities. But most important, also plan in advance for these, to think out of the box and also see what are the threats emerging and what could be the weaknesses that we have and how do we strengthen these defenses.
So with regard to the underground railway tunnel that's being built in the Sikkim region, the Rangpur railways, do you think do we have enough infrastructure to counter the infrastructure that the Chinese have built on their side?
It's true the Chinese in the 1980s did a lot of work in the infrastructure in Tibet. They are spending $23 billion in the 14th five-year plan, which is under implementation. So $23 billion, we have not been able to put it up across in India as a whole, $23 billion. So I think there is a lesson to be learned here. They started in 1980s, we just started after Galwan incident. But the progress is also quite good. We have initiated in October 2020 some 44 strategic roads. And if you go to these areas, most of these are dug up areas. The BRO, GREF, all are doing substantial work. And today we have also cooperation from Japan and other advanced technology countries. We were able to play up the diplomacy to bring in those companies from abroad to do deep digging inside the mountains and use the advanced technologies for these. So I think we are not lagging behind completely. China has a lead because they have also began the reform program and became second largest economy by 2010. We are fifth largest economy, and fortunately, of course, our growth rates are high. If the growth rates are high, we can channelize more money into these projects. But one problem that we are still making is that we are not associating these strategic roads with SMEs and the local chambers of commerce. We need to merge, otherwise these become standalone projects, which just for the military purposes but not for the civilian purposes. So we need to integrate these with, we need to talk to the villages, we need to talk to the tehsils, districts, associate them with these through MNREGA projects or through whatever, so that they all also become stakeholders.
So why is the integration not happening? SMEs are doing pretty, on their own, like it's a standalone, these are doing pretty well. And you look at the success of the MNREGA, we have cases in Assam where villages are doing well, there's been development. When it comes to integration, particularly when it comes to the question of defense, there seems to be a disconnect. And this is not now, it's been there for quite some time. So what do you think is required? Just the political will, is that enough? Or do you think the defense establishment needs to rethink their way of, let's say, interacting or exchanging values? These are literally values with the people on the ground.
The defense will do their own projects, sometimes divorced from the local situation because their focus is defending. mobilizing forces during times of crisis. So they will do on their own many of these, and we should welcome this because that would actually give you the hard infrastructure, the roads, the railways, the fiber optics. The integration with the civil society has to be done by startups, by the states concerned, homestays, the tourist industry being built up, and it's bubbling in that sector. So we need to also think out of the box how to use these hard infrastructure developed by the defense establishment to integrate that with the civil society.
So if I could just, sorry, stop you there just for a minute, and if you can park your thought, I just want to sort of focus on something that's become increasingly relevant. Like you see, you are in Guwahati, you've seen the last 4 days it's been raining. This has happened after decades. We've had scorching heat. The temperature has been like going through the roof, like they say, 38, but feeling 48 and all of that. So there's a climate change happening everywhere, and this is real, all over. Now the hard infrastructure, or the work that the defense does, the BRO and the GREV, the roads that they make, there's incentive for the civil society, there's incentive for the people and the non-state, let's say, that wants to also set up its shop and do some business and trade. But that also causes the harm to the infrastructure, to the fragile environment, to the fragile ecosystem. For example, we are talking about homestays all over India. We talk about homestays in Northeast. Lots of homestays are coming up. But along with the homestays, there's a flood of people, there's more cars, there's more pollution, there's more dirt, there's more quote-unquote waste that's been thrown around, and all that is really harmful for the environment. So at what cost are we really thinking of doing these integrations, or let's say the plans that you've just spoken about in terms of the infrastructure that will be built by the defense establishment, and we, the non-state or the civil society, is going to use that infrastructure?
This is inevitable. The people coming in, tourism increasing. Once you open up the roads, the people start coming in, and you can't avoid this. What we can do is to have alternative plans, convince the tourists to adapt more environment-friendly methods, garbage collection and eco-tourism. So we need to educate in that process, and we need to have different ethos in regard to. I remember in 1970s in my childhood, there were spittoons all across, and they would say, you only spit in that spittoon, and people would follow.
Today, every place is a spittoons.
I think when you go to other places with advertisements on Doordarshan, on FM radio, once you have this creating this kind of an environment, people start behaving. I would expect, and they are doing it. So I explain my childhood experience to say, in many areas that I go, people don't speak any longer. Railway stations used to have these spittoons. Now you don't find spittoons because they don't spit in those places. And I think gradually people learn, and
So
we need to educate.
why I said this is because this is important. This again brings us back to the Siliguri Corridor. My friend here, Vinayak, is from Siliguri. He stays there, and he will agree with me, I think. There's been a disproportional rise in Siliguri of people, of infrastructure. There are buildings coming up left, right and center. The number of cars in the last 3 years I've traveled to that place. I've taken a little property there, you won't believe it. I can actually count the number of cars that have gone up. So it's like so disproportionate. I think for me that's the danger, and that is a security danger.
I think the automobile industry will follow once the roads are there. You can't stop them. We should find alternative routes then. Many countries do. United States, go to Houston. It's a maze of roads. They're finding every 10 years they build alternative routes. People do listen to the advertisements, and if these are packaged very well and we educate them, people do listen to, and The other way is coercion by increasing the taxes. And side by side, we need to also improve the public infrastructure, public transportation, public, say for example, EVs, buses with electric facility. So that is, we need to think in advance.
So what you're saying is also good, and before Binayak come in, I really asked, because you've been to China, sir, you've spent time over there, I've been to China, and when we are comparing ourselves to China, as let's say our adversary, you look at the small cities, the cities that are considerably rural, they are so developed, there's much more discipline than us. Their traffic, they are huge, the number of cars that are there in China, but there is a system over there. It's a different government, it's not a democratically elected government, we have democracy, that's the only difference. I just wanted to share this thought, it's not really a question.
In China, the corruption is very high. They would say, we will give you these many billions of dollars and everything is siphoned off. And there is no civil society participation. In many remote areas, the poverty level is very, very high despite substantial capital being spent on these places. So I think we are better off because we are negotiating with each group, environmental groups, the civil society groups, cultural, and then we put in the villages, tehsils, mandals, as a stakeholder. If a public infrastructure project is going through, if 60% of the residents don't allow for that infrastructure, we don't have infrastructure, accountability. But in the case of India, because of the free press and checks and balances at the local level, I think ours is a more sustainable system rather than the Chinese.
So coming towards the close of this lovely conversation, you in your lovely lecture yesterday mentioned about why we need to look more into the BDI and the BIMSTEC. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is this can also be a zone of connectivity rather than just security.
Absolutely. I think instead of looking inward, how to protect the Siliguri Corridor, I think we should go out to East Nepal. We should go out to West Bhutan. We should go out to North Bangladesh. We should be proactive in suggesting to various corridors, providing them sea access to Nepal, to Bhutan. We already identified Visakhapatnam for Nepal. In the case of Bhutan, there are some sensitivities with the monarchy. They do not want to just open up every other area. It is their concern, we need to respect them. And for instance, on Motor Vehicles Act, there is some reservation for the Bhutanese on that, for uninterrupted flow of the vehicles and so on. They have environmental issues, they have other issues with this uninterrupted flow. We should respect their concerns on this and move forward with alternative ways of connectivity. These days now we are looking at air connectivity, which is less polluting, and although it is costly, but this is one area where we can look for. We are now looking at drones as a way of logistics. So this is one we should develop with civil society as a basis rather than state systems and others, which sometimes may be looked at as a top-down approach.
Would it be correct to say then, sir, that instead of thinking of stopping the Chinese advances, we should be actually focusing on what you were saying as phase one or step one to go to the next step, which is to literally stop the Chinese from advancing as they are?
Yeah, one of the strengths that we have is co-opting, creating stakeholders across, and a democratic approach. We are talking to the states concerned, people concerned. China doesn't have that. China is, all their state-owned enterprises are entering these countries, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh. We have a vibrant private sector. We have a vibrant small and medium enterprises who are working at the grassroots levels and they understand the environment, they understand the local situation. It's not a top-down approach, it's a bottom-up approach. So they make mistakes, but they learn from those mistakes, and it's more viable than a top-down approach. China has a lot of problem with this because much of their investments, etc., or aid is leading to debt trap. In our case, it is it's a very low interest rate that we are giving it, and as our economy expands, we have enough resources then to provide as loans, aid, friendly on a friendly basis to countries like Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar.
I was mentioning about the debt traps that Sri Lanka, so Sri Lanka has already faced, Pakistan is facing, with regard to Chinese loans. And you mentioned about how even Bangladesh was facing it much before, Sina had to leave the scene. What is the lesson there for Nepal, then, sir? I mean, since they are, one of the Indian fears is that, they are getting closer to China.
Well, Nepal leadership should first decide about it. So they should have a very concerted national strategy that can only be evolved with a good majority in the parliament. The road transportation generally is very costly across the globe. Sea transportation is very cheaper, and they need to have access because they're a landlocked country. So that is very essential. So we can't advise the Nepalese what to do, what not to do, but they have to have their own national strategy, come out with something which is durable, and China utilizes this as a tool to subjugate many of their national policies.
I think what you just said is correct. We can't do much about Nepal. Mr. Oli seems to be much closer to Beijing. It's been a wonderful discussion again with you. It's always wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your hospitality and bringing me here.
Thank you, sir. Please keep coming back to the Northeast, and let's talk about the Siliguri Corridor again and again. Right, Vinayak?
Yes, sir. Next conference there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.